Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelson in Ottawa on this Wednesday. Tonight, a defiant Pierre Poilievre.
Does this say anything about your leadership? Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my wife's plan is to continue to lead.
The Conservative leader takes questions for the first time since losing 2 MPs a week ago. Is his leadership in jeopardy? Our front bench is here to dig into that in just moments. Sharon Carr, Louis Hammond, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Skamsky will all be with us. Plus, climate climb down?
But fairly, it does not live up to its promise of generational investments.
Does the Prime Minister have a caucus unity issue after tabling a budget that abandons years of Liberal climate policy? Former Environment and Energy Minister and current Liberal MP Jonathan Wilkinson will join us coming up, and I plan to ask him. Then, a united G7?
Canada will continue to lead with resolve as a steadfast partner, a trusted ally, and a force for peace.
We'll take you to the G7 foreign ministers meeting in southern Ontario, where the shadow of Donald Trump's second term looms over every discussion. We'll go one-on-one with the European Union's foreign minister, Kaja Kallas, a little bit later on in the show. First, though. Caucus unity is front and center 1 week out from the budget. First up, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre took questions from reporters for the first time since losing 2 MPs, Nova Scotia MP Chris D'Entremont, who crossed the floor to the Liberals, and Alberta MP Matt Genereux, who announced he's quitting Parliament altogether following widespread speculation he would also cross the floor. But Poilievre today focusing in on Team Carney.
I'll quote Nate Erskine-Smith, a Liberal MP who now says that his children should not have to pay for Mark Carney's budget. And I know that there will be wall-to-wall coverage on CTV of this turmoil, of a Liberal MP criticizing his own budget days before the vote. I know you're camped outside his office right now, waiting to get comment from him. I know you've been chasing Mark Carney down hallways to find out what he has to say. I understand also there's former Liberal Minister Guilbeault is unhappy with the environmental policies that while he supports raising costs, he doesn't think they raise them enough. We've got Wilkinson is unhappy. So I know that I'm looking forward to seeing the wall-to-wall coverage on CTV of all of the costly turmoil in the Liberal budget. So I will be tuning in tonight.
Poilievre referred to a couple of things. First up, Toronto Liberal MP Nate Erskine-Smith, who took to social media to share his issues with the budget. Have a listen.
And look, it's certainly not a budget that should throw us into an election at such an uncertain time. But fairly, it does not live up to its promise of generational investments. I joked that it was a pretty good progressive conservative budget. I joked. I'll get flack for that. It's a joke.
Now, Erskine-Smith has long cultivated a reputation for speaking his mind in caucus while also supporting the government on matters of confidence. Then there was additionally reporting this week from the Toronto Sun that former Trudeau-era environment ministers Stephen Guilbeault and Jonathan Wilkinson are unhappy with Prime Minister Carney's pull away from policies they championed. We invited the Conservatives on our program today, but nobody was made available. Former Environment and Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson is the Liberal MP for North Vancouver Capilano. Hi, Mr. Wilkinson. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
It's good to see you as well.
For the sake of transparency, I asked our team to reach out to you this morning because I was already thinking about the climate policy. I was curious as to your reaction. And then a few hours later, Pierre Poilievre held a press conference and he actually name-dropped you, invoked you next to Minister Guilbeault to sort of, I guess, laid some groundwork for his lamenting of the media not covering internal Liberal turmoil enough. So I thought I'd put the question to you directly, since he invoked your name. Are you unhappy?
No, I'm not unhappy. And I didn't see his press conference, although I do find it interesting that he invoked my name. Look, I have been enormously privileged to be the Member of Parliament for North Vancouver Capilano now for 10 years. I got into politics because of climate and the associated sort of opportunities in the economy, having run energy tech companies for 20 years. I got to be the Minister of the Environment for a long time. I got to be the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources for a long time, and I think made a difference. And I now am working closely with my colleagues who have those jobs to try to ensure that we move things forward.
So on that note, I will get back to the original reason I wanted to interview is because we spent a long time when you were serving in both of those capacities in interviews where you were defending the policies that that government had put in place as, very important to reducing emissions. And as I've seen a number of those either pause or be rolled back in the name of economic growth, I have been curious as to whether or not that is, disappointing to you, to say the least. Is it?
Well, I guess what I would say is, first of all, a lot of the things that we actually put into the original climate plan and worked then to implement are actually moving forward. On the economic side, the investment tax credits took some time to actually get implemented, but now they are there and they are accessible for companies that actually across the board can make investments in clean energy. There are, the methane regulations are moving forward, the clean electricity regulations are moving forward. There's a whole range of them. There are a few areas where the government is making some decisions that are a little bit different. And I would say that in those cases, the emissions cap on the oil and gas sector, for example, the focus was always getting emissions down, and all of the emissions that were associated with the design of the original cap were focused on carbon capture through the Pathways Project and methane regs. And, the budget said they're going to be focused on getting both of those done. So I'm not too fussed about that. You probably are also referring to the retail carbon price. And I would say, look, it's disappointing for me as somebody who was a defender of that. It is the most economically efficient way to reduce emissions. That being said, Mr. Poilievre turned it into a very divisive issue across this country. I think it's too bad because it actually is good public policy. But at the end of the day, I supported the Prime Minister's decision, and I was still the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources at that time, to move away from that and to focus on other areas where we can get the emissions reductions in manners that are not quite so divisive. And again, I blame Mr. Poilievre for doing that.
But I guess the reason, again, why I was curious as to your reaction is because I take your point on some of the stuff that you mentioned. But the point is that if you start subtracting and you look at the Canadian Climate Institute, for example, and the degree to which each of those policies was to contribute to declines in emissions by 2030, the emissions cap meant something. It meant a significant amount. The consumer carbon price meant 9% as well. And there's no detail as to what, yes, there's strengthening of the industrial carbon price, but there's been no detail about when that gets triggered, to what level, nothing like that. So right now, I can't see one credible environmentalist who is saying we're going to meet the targets that your previous government put into legislation for 2030 and 2035, and I can't get a specific answer from any minister on that. How can that not be disappointing to you?
Well, first of all, let me say in the budget, the statement around the industrial price and forecasting it forward and making it more stringent is enormously important, and it is a bold step with respect to climate action in this country. And I think that's something that folks should recognize. Certainly, there are some changes that are being made. And I do think that the government is going to need to come forward at some point with a more comprehensive climate plan. Like the climate competitiveness thing that was in the budget was about climate competitiveness. It wasn't intended to be a full-blown climate plan. That is something that the government's going to need to reflect on. Obviously, the Net Zero Accountability Act, which I put into place as the Minister of Environment, requires an update by the end of the year. And that's something that I know Minister DeBrusen, Minister Hodgson, and Prime Minister Carney are working on.
Do you believe that this country, though, is on track or will meet the obligations as spelled out through that act? And how difficult is it, or how can you look at Canadians and stand by a government that will not meet those objectives? I can't find anybody from the outside doing analysis who is saying that based on what they see at this moment in time, we are on track to meet anything before 2050.
Well, first of all, just saying net zero by 2050 is the refuge of the climate denier, because it means you don't have to do anything.
That's what the Liberals are saying right now.
But that's not what we're saying. And I think Minister DeBrusen actually said today that they are striving to achieve the objectives for the 2030 number. Obviously, they need to come forward with a plan as to how that's going to be done. But let's be honest. It was always going to be a stretch to get to the 40% number. When we actually developed the detailed climate plan when I was there as Environment Minister, we got to 36% in looking at everything. And we said, okay, we're going to need to actually do more and figure out different ways over the course of the next number of years to try to get to the 40. We are living in an environment which is obviously a bit different with all of the challenges that we've got with the United States. I think Canadians expect, and I think the government understands and supports the need for us to continue to have climate action and to take substantive climate action. But it obviously has to be in the context of the circumstances we find ourselves right now with President Trump and the United States.
You said in March of this year, in the middle of that economic turmoil, to oil and gas CEOs that scrapping environmental policies, quote, at a time of economic crisis will hurt Canadians in the long run. How can you support a government that takes that position at this point vis-a-vis an economic crisis that you just mentioned?
Well, that was in the letter that I wrote in response to some of the oil and gas CEOs who had published a letter saying we needed to get rid of all of environmental regulation. And most importantly, the industrial carbon price, which most of those folks had actually only a year or two before been active supporters of. At the end of the day, the industrial carbon price is actually not just going to continue. It's actually going to be strengthened. And so I actually think that the government is making the right moves. It will need to continue to be ambitious, and there will be lots of folks like myself that are going to push them to continue to be ambitious. But this government believes in the science of climate change. It is taking action to address climate change. That's a heck of a lot more than you can say for the fellow across the aisle who can't even, bring himself to say that he believes in science anymore.
But that person isn't the prime minister. That person wasn't the former UN envoy on climate change. That party isn't in government, and it isn't the party for the last 10 years that told us we can't sacrifice the future of Canadians and their health through climate change for economic objectives.
Well, and I continue to believe that. I mean, look, I got into politics because of climate change. I am enormously concerned about climate change. It's a science issue. It shouldn't be a partisan or a political issue. We need to continue to take action. I think this government understands that very well, is taking action. Is it going to need to do more as we move forward? Almost certainly yes, but that's true of governments all around the world. And look, I mean, Mr. Carney's been very clear. Like, he has worked on climate issues for many years. If you've read his book, he certainly is committed to the fight against climate change. But it also has to be done right now in the context of what is a very challenging set of circumstances for Canada. So let's move forward, but let's be smart about it.
I have one final question for you on a separate issue. I'm not sure if you're prepared to answer. But prior to this interview, you've been written about on numerous occasions as possibly being appointed to be ambassador to the EU. Is there any truth to that?
Look, I have always said that I am interested in serving this country. After a long time in the business community, I got into politics for public service. I'm interested in doing what I can to advance the interests of Canada in the best way possible. At the present time, that's being the Member of Parliament for North Vancouver Capilano and working within the government to try to ensure that some of these issues continue to be on the radar screen. What happens in the future, I'm not going to speculate on.
So am I correct in reading that as not a hard no?
As I say, I am always interested in conversations about how I can make a contribution, and I will continue to, through the course of the rest of my working life, be interested in that.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Mr. Wilkinson, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much.
Former Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson coming up tonight on Power Play. Our front bench is ready to go. We're going to talk about Pierre Poilievre's first comments following two of his MPs leaving and the Fed's second round of major projects set to be announced tomorrow. Sharon Carr, Louis Hammond, Jamie Ellerton, and Sebastian Skamsky. There they are. They're back with me in just 2 minutes.
You lost 2 MPs the week of the budget. One cited your leadership as a reason for leaving. I just want to put Carney and the Liberals to the side here, just as you personally.
Of course you do.
Does this say anything about your leadership? Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my plan is to continue to lead and be the only leader in the country that's fighting for an affordable Canada, where our people who work hard can afford a home and food. That is my agenda. And I will just quote Mr. d'Entremont when he speaks about Mark Carney. He says, after 6 months under a new Prime Minister who promised financial discipline, Canadians are still waiting. He said that he would be judged by the cost of groceries at the store. Well, Canadians are judging him, and they are not impressed.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre defending his leadership for the first time since 2 of his MPs announced they were leaving. And in short, Poilievre says he's not going anywhere. In case you forgot, just minutes after the federal budget was tabled, Nova Scotia MP Chris D'Entremont crossed the floor to the Liberals, later saying Poilievre's leadership was partly to blame for his decision. And just 2 days later, Alberta MP Matt Genereux said he would be resigning as an MP next year. Multiple sources, including 2 close to Genereux, have told CTV News he was going to defect to the Liberals, but ultimately made the decision to step down altogether instead. All of that, as Poilievre himself pointed to Liberal MPs he says are unhappy with Prime Minister Mark Carney's shift in environmental policies. Among them is Identity and Culture Minister Stephen Guilbeault, former Environment Minister, and the other is former Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, whom I spoke to earlier in the show. He had this to say in response to Mr. Poilievre.
No, I'm not unhappy. And I didn't see his press conference, although I do find it interesting that he invoked my name. Look, I have been enormously privileged to be the Member of Parliament for North Vancouver Capilano now for 10 years. I got into politics because of climate and the associated sort of opportunities in the economy, having run energy tech companies for 20 years. I got to be the Minister of the Environment for a long time. I got to be the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources for a long time. And I think made a difference. And I now am working closely with my colleagues who have those jobs to try to ensure that we move things forward.
Lots for us to unpack with our front bench. Louis Hammond was a senior advisor to Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne. Jamie Ellerton is the principal at Canaptus and worked for Minister Jason Kenney during the Harper government. Together in downtown Toronto, Sebastian Skamsky on the left there was former Director of Media Relations to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. And Sharon Carr is a CTV News political analyst. She's former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Nice to see you. Jamie, I'll start with you. What's your read on what we heard from Mr. Poilievre today?
I think more of the same of what you've heard from Pierre when these have come up in the past. I thought it was kind of a curious response in the fact that it now just essentially with this confrontational approach with media, which he's shown in the past, has fueled another media cycle talking about, again, the fact that a Conservative MP crossed the floor to join the Liberals. I would hope for the Conservative Party's sake that now that he's made this public appearance and talked about it again, they will finally be able to turn the page and get back to holding this government to account.
So the primary argument, Louis, from Mr. Poilievre was basically there's lots going on when it comes to turmoil in the Liberals, as he characterized it. And he definitely seemed to imply, if not overtly say, like the media is not covering that enough. Meanwhile, they're fixated on someone crossing the floor from the Conservatives to the Liberals. What do you make of that? And what do you think his response today said more broadly to Canadians?
Well, somebody's going to have to explain this to me, Vashi, because quite frankly, you've got a Pierre Poilievre here who's been over the last 10 days trying to sort of manage what I would qualify as a break the glass in case of emergency situation, a situation where clearly more of the same is not going to cut it. And what did we get today in Calgary? We got exactly more of the same from Pierre Poilievre. This is turning off not only Canadians, not only voters, it's also turning off people in the Conservative Party. And I get that Pierre Poilievre is wanting to remain authentic because authenticity is the mother milk of politics. But it seems that within that spectrum of authenticity, he's only got one trick in his bag, and that's attack, attack, attack all the time. It's not working. He sounds bitter, charmless. He doesn't look prime ministerial. And you know what? Something says it all. This is a guy who's been in politics for 20 years, an experienced politician, and he's 20 points behind a rookie politician who'd never done this 6 months ago. Something is wrong there. It's not working out.
So, Sebastian, I think Louis is pointing to personal numbers for Poilievre versus Carney. The party numbers are much closer. In fact, it's like an extremely close race all these months after the election. What do you think is informing the posture that Mr. Poilievre took today, and why do you think he took the approach he did?
Well, Vashi, I think Mr. Poilievre is responding to a very coordinated campaign on the part of the Liberals, who are doing everything in their possibility to distract from the budget, and from a Liberal-friendly media, frankly, who we have to admit has been frothing at the mouth to see this kind of peddled. I think what Mr. Poilievre underlined today, of course, are the extreme specific example of Mr. D'Entremont and the words that even you recited about his hypocrisy in blaming the Prime Minister for the bad effect that he had on the part of on Canadians and their grocery prices, and how now he's joined their team and seemingly forgot all about that. In fact, it was the budget that he was complaining so much about that he subsequently joined the Liberal caucus too. So I think Mr. Poilievre has shown over the last few days that the caucus is firmly and squarely behind him, that these were isolated instances, and that despite the best wishes of the media and Liberal commentariat class members, he's here to stay, and he's going to bring home a win for Conservatives and a win for Canadians the next election around.
I take the point. I definitely can't defend the entirety of the media, but I can say I think I've interviewed 5 different ministers for a total of 15 minutes each on scrutinizing the content of the budget. And I know, if you describe frothing at the mouth, certainly when Chrystia Freeland was resigning or SNC was going on, or the myriad of scandals that the Trudeau government found themselves in, the media was, at least I can speak for ourselves, we were here covering that as well. Sharon, what does it say to you that this is the posture that Mr. Poilievre took?
It's that he's showing his true colors. He's always been a bully, and he will always be a bully. Attacking the media, even with your tone and tenor, says a lot about you. It's one thing to try to be charismatic in one room, but if you're going to turn this switch on and try to be adversarial, it's just who he is. And listen, Pierre Poilievre is a very good communicator to his base. He's really good at sticking to his message, but you know what he's not good at? Getting people to like him. And the problem we saw in the last election is he wasn't able to pivot. He wanted to always make things about Trudeau and always be adversarial. And we saw that again today. And I think what we're seeing is the authentic Pierre Poilievre. And we've seen that story before. And there's been data out there that says women don't like him, for example, because of his tone and tenor and how he perceives himself. So I'm not shocked by this. I'm not surprised by it. I think that his commentary around his former colleague says a lot about him. We saw the statement that came out of the OLO as well, and that too just says what kind of people they are. And you know what? The way they're ruling it right now, it comes off as bully tactics.
I do think, Jamie, though, that on issues around the budget, for example, affordability, all his communication still works. And you can tell that. That's borne out by how close the Conservatives find themselves to the Liberals. It's not like the Liberals have a slam dunk with this budget or in general with Canadians at the moment. They have the honeymoon after the budget is over. But at the same time, I find it curious that you can deny that there's any significance to someone minutes after a budget being tabled, leaving your party to go to the government and taking them one seat closer, just 2 seats away from a majority. To just say that should be nothing is curious to me.
Yeah, actually, which is why I actually said in your show last week, the more the Conservatives rail against it for crossing against the floor, the more they're doing is breathing oxygen into the story and keeping people talking about it. I think if Pierre wants to turn the page on this, he's going to have to just stop talking about this and find better lines to give himself a bridge to another place. He could simply say, listen, the Conservative caucus is filled with people who are tired of reckless government spending. If people are not tired of reckless government spending, they can go across the floor too. But the Conservative team's united on holding this government to account, making life more affordable, and we're going to get government out of the way so that more projects get built. And he can repeat that ad nauseum, and the press gallery will stop asking him. But instead, he's not doing that, and he's making it more confrontational, which is why I think you're seeing another round of stories today talking about his leadership and not this federal budget.
Louis, what do you think about the video from Nathaniel Erskine-Smith? We sort of teed it up off the top of the show and played some of it. He called it a progressive conservative budget, that it didn't do what it promised to do, which we've seen that criticism echoed elsewhere. How big of a deal is it to you that he said that as a Liberal MP?
Flight takes off from Montreal, lands in Toronto, Vashi. There's no story here. I mean, quite frankly, I think I'm surprised that people are surprised to be hearing, some of the caucus members on the Liberal side sort of, being rubbed the wrong way with some of the ways that, Mark Carney is doing things. Let's remember, Mark Carney ran and has been governing, trying to differentiate himself from Justin Trudeau. So is it surprising that some of the people who actually went into politics on the Trudeau agenda would be rubbed the wrong way by some of the ways that he's doing things? Absolutely not. I think this does not really raise over the level of, just normal political drama. Obviously, it's got to be kept, it's got to be kept under control, if you will. But, I don't think there's much of a story here, or should we be very surprised about what we're hearing? Some of these people were, passed up as ministers. Maybe, some of them, as I said, came into politics on the Trudeau agenda. Mark Carney, again, has been turning his back on some of the policies from the Trudeau era. So no surprise here on my end, quite frankly.
Sebastian, my guess is, I have time for both you, a quick comment from you and Cher. My guess is you feel differently.
Yeah, entirely. I mean, let's remember why all of this has been sparked. It's about the prospect of the budget not passing. When you have a former minister putting out a very polished video describing the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Liberal budget, I think it begs a lot of questions, and I think it should command a lot more media attention. I would recommend, your colleagues Vashi at the Toronto Star or the CBC to knock on his door and ask a bit more about whether Mr. Carney can find the votes in his own caucus for his own budget.
Sharon, last word to you.
Listen, I'm with Louis on this. There's no surprise to this. I've been very vocal in public in the past when MP Nader Skin-Smith has kind of flip-flopped on how hard of a messenger he's going to be for the government. It's no secret that he wasn't happy not to be put back in cabinet. And we saw the tone and tenor shift when he became a cabinet minister and when he wasn't made a cabinet minister. So is this a surprise to me? No. He's trying to build his own name. There's always speculation on whether he's going to run provincially for leader, and he's doing what he can do to build his brand. Is this considered a scandal? No, it's basically just Nader Skin-Smith being Nader Skin-Smith.
Yeah, he says that he doesn't want to force an election. I will say, though, it's also well known that Chris d'Entremont, I mean, it's at a different level, but Chris d'Entremont wasn't happy about the speaker election as well. So everybody seems to have some personal gripes. We'll take a quick break. We'll go from personal to much less personal. Let's talk about major projects. Round 2 will be announced tomorrow. The Prime Minister is set to make that announcement. We'll unpack what we know and what it says with our front bench next.
We happen to be fortunate enough to possess in abundance 10 of the 12 core critical minerals that NATO describes as essential going forward. The Department of Natural Resources is busy now developing a plan to identify, to stockpile, to eventually develop.
It's great that they're doing the Crawford Nickel project. I love it. But let's get out of our way on everything else. Let's get out of our way when it comes to the Ring of Fire. Make sure we have one project, one process until we don't have duplication from the federal government. We need to be talking about large-scale nuclear.
Reaction there to the federal government's next phase of so-called major projects as we learn more about which projects will be unveiled tomorrow. Sources tell CTV News that the Silicium LNG facility in BC will be on the list, as well as a hydroelectric development project in Iqaluit, the Sisson Mine project in New Brunswick, and the Crawford Nickel Mine project in Northern Ontario. What does the latest list of projects tell us about the federal government's priorities, and what are the political stakes of those choices? Our front bench is back. Sharon Carr, Louis Hammond, Jamie Allerton, and Sebastian Skamsky. Louis, I'm going to start with you. One of the first things, and you have a lot of experience in industry and sort of the government making choices. One of the things that stood out to me is I think that first round of projects that were announced, most of them were very, very close to the finish line in some respect or another. Some were already actually in development. So it felt less political risk, not very politically risky. This one I thought would be more politically risky, but when I look at that list, it also feels not so risky. Like a lot of that stuff, like the mine in New Brunswick has been approved since 2015. What is your read on what you think they're trying to do with this list?
I would say you need to walk before you run on this one, Vashi. And what I think is good is to see the government moving fairly quickly. I mean, Mark Carney has been in office for about 6 months, moving fairly quickly, putting these projects in the windows. You had about a half a dozen about a month ago, a half a dozen tomorrow are going to be announced. So that's good. I think the challenge for this government is going to sort of, find a way to jazz these things up a little bit, to dress them up a little bit. To get people behind these projects. These are big spend projects. They are a centerpiece of the Carney economic policy. Yet these are not the kinds of projects that excite people very much. I mean, especially when it comes to infrastructure in politics, people like to see things. A new railway, a new subway station, a new airport. a lot of these projects, as ambitious and as important as they are, people will never see them. I mean, you know, a hydro line in Iqaluit, an LNG gas terminal in northern BC, and a nickel mine in northern Ontario. I mean, you know, this does not exactly excite people so much. So I think there's going to be a challenge for the government to try and sort of frame these in a way that people get behind this. And the other thing I think to watch for, and the other thing that's going to need to come online fairly quickly, is the private sector buy-in to some of these projects. I mean, we've talked a lot about this. The Carney government has made clear that the federal government is not going to bankroll these projects, but the idea is to incentivize private capital to come in. Well, I think folks are going to want to see that happening, again, to sort of get behind these projects because they are generational and they will transform the Canadian economy. So it's important to get folks behind these projects.
I think part of the issue is, Sebastian, that the Prime Minister himself has built this up to be such a, in the same way that he built the budget up, to be so transformative, that you have to imagine there is a challenge, to Louis' point, and I'm not sure if he's making it exactly the same way, but there's a challenge in trying to land that plane. And I think that challenge was embodied in the budget, and I'm not sure they did land it, and I'm very curious to see the way they attempt to land it with these lists.
Yeah, I mean, unimaginable speeds. That's what Prime Minister Carney sold to Canadians when he ran in his last campaign. He sold Build, Baby, Build. There was talk of a pipeline. And now we see, obviously, the first tranche of projects, which you mentioned, all of which had been in some form or another already under construction. This one, as you mentioned rightly, the mine, which has been approved since 2015. These sorts of projects do not meet the kind of inspirational talk of Mr. Carney. He is quick to put on a hard hat and do a photo op. He learned very well from Prime Minister Trudeau in that regard. But unfortunately for Canadians, he hasn't delivered. Just this past Friday in Toronto, he scoffed when he was asked at a swanky lunch full of Liberals in downtown Toronto about the prospect of building a pipeline. He called it boring. These are the projects that we need to provide our country with economic self-sufficiency, with our ability to actually get exports out to markets in Europe. If Mr. Carney wants to truly diversify trade, he would really take this seriously and get shovels in the ground and move out of the way so Canadians can prosper.
I hate to be fair, but wasn't Pierre Poilievre down the street at another swanky lunch
at the same time?
And he was supporting the building of pipelines.
Okay, so let's pay. Everyone likes their swanky lunch. We'll put that aside for a second and drill in on one thing that I find fascinating right now, which is this pipe. I found that back and forth very interesting, and he was dismissive of the series of questions. But I find Alberta's reaction right now equally fascinating, Sharon, because we used to be, like, during the Trudeau years, the easiest thing in the world. Reach out to Scott Moe and Danielle Smith, see what they think, because it's not going to be pretty, right? And they're going to come back swiftly with, this is terrible, this is disadvantaging Albertans, this is, et cetera, et cetera. And they're not saying that right now. In fact, they're holding off on pronouncing anything until the possibility of a memorandum of understanding, apparently, for which there are negotiations going on, could be announced as soon as next week. Like, what do you make of that? I am like, it is so counterintuitive, or so not what I am used to covering the relationship, that I am, very interested in what happens next week, Sharon.
Well, it means there's progress in interprovincial relationships, and it means there's actually progress in building things. Listen, I know talking about a mine or talking about LNG is not sexy for everyone, but listen, during the Trudeau time, the government had to buy a pipeline to get it done. Nothing was built during Harper days. Rarely anything really got built during Trudeau's days because there's no appetite for it, because we have a really convoluted system. So what we're seeing now is a relationship between Ottawa and people like Danielle Smith and people like Scott Moe, because they see things are going to get done, and it's not adversarial. So while these are not massive projects like a cross-country railway or something that people can see right away, or a tunnel under the 401, it means that there is an appetite to build, because when the government shows an appetite to build, it means proponents will come back. Proponents don't want to build right now, because why would they? For the longest time, with the last government and the government before that, the environment around consultation and regulation made it so challenging. And what we're seeing now is a turning page for Ottawa, Alberta, and Saskatchewan because they actually agree on something, and that means building.
I have to be fair again. Not nothing got done under Harper and not nothing under Trudeau. There were projects that went ahead, but I take your point on the desire of this current government to delineate its regulatory approach from, in particular, the previous government. Jamie, I think at the same time, Sharon's point, I don't know why we keep coming back to this every Wednesday about whether or not something's sexy, but I get it that it's not sexy. But to Louis's point that we started off with, I think because of the preamble to all of this coming from the Prime Minister, like they have to make it sexy because they've said this is going to change our economy.
Yeah, I think this fundamentally does go back to how our economy is going to work. And I think there's some opportunities here to actually demonstrate that we can still actually get projects built in this country. I think the reason why you are not seeing a pipeline on this is because there is no proponent. And there is no proponent exactly because of the policies of the previous Trudeau government that drove investment out of this country, so much so that they had to nationalize a pipeline to get the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain pipeline twinned and operational. And so I think when you look at what's going on here, I think when you see what's happening in Alberta and Saskatchewan, those are premiers that recognize how much it'll mean for their economy in each province, as well as the entire country, to be able to get a framework that's actually going to have the support of the federal government. As fun as it might be to be dial-a-quote and you deliver a snarky line to media, it's even better when you see thousands of people have paychecks and well-paying jobs that lifts government coffers as well, so that we do have things like transit, schools, and hospitals and other things. And so I think that's part of why you're seeing that shift. I think when you look at what this means for the opposition, I think as Sebastian has rightly honed in on, the aspirational rhetoric of what Mark Carney has said and what he's delivered is a massive gulf. And the question ultimately, I think, for his prime ministership becomes, can he deliver on enough between now and the next election so that Canadians actually feel a difference? Or is it just going to be essentially effectively sold as Ottawa more talk without action that gives the opposition, and particularly Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, an opening to say, here's a better way?
Execution matters. I got to leave it on that note. Thank you for all executing so wonderfully tonight. I appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Louis Hammond, Sharon Carr, Sebastian Skamsky, and Jamie Ellerton. We're going to take a quick commercial break here on Power Play. On the other end of that break, the EU's foreign minister, former Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, will join me from the G7 in Niagara. Welcome back to Power Play. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand has just wrapped a meeting with her G7 counterparts in Niagara, Ontario. The Global Summit gave Anand the chance to sit down face-to-face with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. According to the both of them, they spoke about transatlantic security, the Indo-Pacific, and reinforcing supply chains. But no indication on any progress on trade talks, which of course have been stalled since last month after Ontario's anti-tariff ad angered U.S. President Donald Trump. Reporters repeatedly asked Anand why trade was not on the agenda with Rubio, considering those negotiations are at a total impasse. Have a listen to the minister's response.
You met with Marco Rubio today. Did either of you raise resuming trade talks? And if so, what was discussed?
The issues relating to trade fall within the purview of my colleague Dominic LeBlanc, and that's where they remain, as they should.
So you can then confirm that you had this one-on-one, face-to-face opportunity with an American counterpart, and you didn't take that chance to try to have a conversation about resuming trade talks when so much of the Canadian economy is relying on it.
I can confirm that I'm representing Canada's interests as the foreign minister, and I maintained Canadian interests and the Canadian position on a number of very serious issues.
G7 allies at the meeting more broadly focused on security, and a pillar of this country's new foreign policy involves re-engagement with Europe in amplifying the relationship between the EU and Canada. The High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, was at the meeting in Niagara, and she's with us now. Hi, Minister. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our program. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
When I last spoke with you, you were serving in a different capacity. It was just a number of weeks after Russia's war on Ukraine broke out. And I remember very clearly at the time, You were critical of Canada for a low level of defense spending. We have obviously changed at least our intention and certainly our posture on that. And I'm wondering if you denote that and if you feel it is significant.
No, the increase that Canada has done in defense spending is incredible. I mean, from 1.2% to 2%. I know that it requires a lot from the taxpayers and, of course, the budget. So it is significant. But it shows that all of us have to do more for defense, increasing defense expenditure during peacetime in order to deter all the aggressors or would-be aggressors.
A big part of that effort where Europe is concerned is the Rearm Europe project. And Canada has signaled its intention to partner with Europe on that. We don't have a lot of details on our end about what that actually means. From where you sit, Minister, what tangibly does it mean?
Well, it gives Canada access to defense procurement, also cooperation with European defense companies, but also giving access for your companies to the defense procurement in Europe. So it is something that benefits us both. We go a long way in the defense and security partnership. We are very like-minded partners. Of course, these negotiations on details are still going on, but we are positive that we will end up in a good agreement.
And do you anticipate that that will all go according to what has been laid out so far? And I ask because there's kind of an adjacent program, SAFE, through which loans are essentially doled out for this rearmament. And Canada is supposed to submit, my understanding is, a list of potential investments by the end of November. Is Canada on track to meet that deadline from what you understand?
Well, we are working intensively with our Canadian partners. The deadline is 30th of November, that's true. The work is ongoing, and I'm sure as both parties have the will actually to achieve a result, so I'm positive that we will get there by the deadline.
And can you, for Canadians who are watching tonight, sort of describe, I take your point on working in concert and access to procurement, but what does it look like 10 years from now, for example, if Europe and Canada have engaged at a different level than we are accustomed to?
Well, it's maybe hard to paint that picture, but what I would say is that if we are both spending more on defense, then we also understand that peak capabilities we have to do together. I mean, learning from each other, doing also joint investments, joint procurement, so that it can benefit us both. I mean, when it comes to big capabilities like air defense, for example, that you need, we need, or different capabilities in the maritime sphere, where one part has know-how and the other part has another know-how, but putting this together really makes a difference, and makes a difference also for the defense industry. And if it makes a difference for the defense industry, it also makes a difference for our defense, and then it's more secure that we also have peace, because as I say, investment in defense works as a deterrent.
How much does the amplified relationship between Europe and Canada have to do with the new positioning of the United States on the global stage, the withdrawal in some key areas of U.S. leadership?
Well, it's clear that global world order is changing, and what all the countries in the world. I mean, I also meet a lot of representatives from different countries. What everybody is looking for is diversification of their relationship, and especially their trade portfolios. I think everybody understands that whatever dependencies we have, they are also making us vulnerable. So that is, I think, also what we are looking at when we are talking about critical raw materials. The dependency on China on many issues is making us vulnerable. If we work together, we are also able to react to this and come forward stronger.
As far as dependency goes, in Europe's case, the dependency on Russia previously for natural gas has proven to be a very big issue that Europe obviously wants to turn the page on. Canada and the current government have made the pitch that there would be a market in Europe should we decide to export more LNG off our east coast versus our west coast to Asia. Could you, Minister, quantify for us, or qualify for us, is there a market in Europe for Canadian LNG?
Yes, you said it. We have learned the hard way in Europe that what this kind of energy dependency really will eventually cost. And now we have to also focus on not creating new dependencies while getting rid of the old ones. And of course, that also means that the LNG, we are looking for partners all around the world, and definitely, Canada is a very reliable partner also when it comes to LNG.
Okay, Minister, I'm going to leave it on that note. I appreciate your time. Safe travels.
Thank you. All the best.
That's the Foreign Minister for the EU, Kaja Kallas. We'll take a short break. More Power Play just ahead.
It's great that they're doing the Crawford Nickel project. I love it. But let's get out of our way on everything else. Let's get out of our way when it comes to the Ring of Fire. Make sure we have one project, one process until we don't have duplication from the federal government. We need to be talking about large-scale nuclear. And I don't know if we're going to hear about that, but that's a key area that we need investment on.
That's Ontario Premier Doug Ford reacting to the news that the second tranche, the second list of so-called major projects as deemed by the federal government will be released tomorrow. One of those projects is, as he referenced, sources say to CTV, the Crawford Nickel Mine project in Northern Ontario. Here's a look at some of the other projects: the Silicium's LNG facility in BC, a hydroelectric development project in Iqaluit, and then the Sisson Mine in New Brunswick. We'll be paying close attention to any other projects. Those sources had told us in the government that this list is always subject to change, but I think that those ones that you see on the screen ahead of you are almost a certainty. The Prime Minister had promised a second grouping of major projects before the Grey Cup. The Grey Cup will happen this weekend. There are expected to be other projects announced as well, and there's a lot of focus on whether they will do exactly what the Prime Minister and his cabinet has said they will do, which is aid in the transformation, the so-called transformation of Canada's economy against the backdrop of a massive economic threat from the United States. I am going to leave Power Play on that note. We'll have full coverage tomorrow and reaction to that announcement right here on CTV News Channel. I'm Vashi Capellas. Thanks so much for watching tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow.